In 1880s Montana, wealthy cattle baron Beau Remington had everything money could buy, except the one thing his heart craved most: a family. After losing his wife and stillborn son, he built walls around his soul thicker than his ranch's stone foundation. When mail-order bride Lillian Grace Mercer stepped off the dusty train, beautiful and refined, but unable to bear children, Beau turned her away without a second thought. He wouldn't risk his heart again on what seemed like another dead end. But Lillian didn't leave. Instead, she quietly stayed to help his aging housekeeper, tending wounded animals and bringing warmth to cold corners of his ranch. Her gentle spirit began melting ice that had frozen solid for years. When land thieves threatened everything he'd built, Beau discovered something unexpected. Sometimes the family you need isn't the one you planned for. But would he realize this truth before it was too late? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Remington ranch as Beau stood on his wraparound porch, coffee steaming in his weathered hands. 43 years old and master of 15,000 acres of prime Montana grazing land, he commanded respect from every cattleman between Billings and Helena. Yet the emptiness that had settled in his chest 3 years ago remained as vast as the rolling hills that stretched toward the horizon. His boots echoed against the wooden planks as he descended the porch steps, each footfall a familiar rhythm that had marked his days since Catherine's death. The ranch house behind him stood like a monument to prosperity, 2 stories of solid timber and stone, with 12 rooms that had once rung with laughter and the promise of children's voices. Now those rooms held only silence and the memories of what might have been. Martha Kellerman emerged from the kitchen door, her silver hair pinned back in its customary bun, her face creased with concern and 70 years of prairie wisdom. She'd been with the Remington family since before Beau was born, first as his mother's companion, then as head housekeeper, and now as the closest thing to family he had left. "That woman's still here," Martha said without preamble, her voice carrying the weight of disapproval and something softer, perhaps curiosity. "Been up since dawn, tending to the chickens and mending that fence by the vegetable garden. Never seen someone work so quiet-like." Beau's jaw tightened at the mention of Lillian Grace Mercer. 3 days had passed since he'd turned her away. At the train station, 3 days since he'd made it clear that her inability to bear children made her unsuitable as a wife. He'd expected tears, pleading, or at the very least, departure on the next eastbound train. Instead, she'd simply nodded, asked Martha if she needed help with household duties, and settled into the small room above the kitchen as if she belonged there. "She's got to go, Martha. I won't have her staying here out of pity or misguided charity." Martha's eyes, sharp as winter air, studied his face. "Pity? That girl's been earning her keep better than most hired hands. Yesterday, she helped Jimmy mend the corral fence, and I saw her with that lame mare, got her walking steady again with some kind of poultice she mixed up herself. Don't seem like charity to me." The mention of his ranch hands drew Beau's attention to the activity around the barn. Jimmy Kowalski, a Polish immigrant who'd worked the ranch for 8 years, was leading a string of horses to the water trough. Beside him walked Tom Brennan, the ranch foreman whose steady presence had kept operations running smoothly even during Beau's darkest months. Both men had shown unusual interest in the kitchen lately, finding excuses to linger near the house at mealtimes. "The men seemed taken with her," Martha continued, her tone carefully neutral. "She's got a way about her, gentle but not weak, if you understand my meaning. Reminds me of your Catherine in some ways, though she's different too. Quieter, maybe. Like she's used to watching from the edges." Beau's hand tightened around his coffee cup at the mention of his late wife. Catherine had been sunshine and laughter, filling every room with her presence. She died giving birth to their son, their beautiful, perfect son who'd never drawn breath. The loss had carved something out of Beau's chest that he'd never quite figured out how to fill again. "Don't," he said quietly. "Don't compare them." Martha's expression softened. "I'm not comparing, Beau. I'm just saying that woman's got substance. To her. Quality. The kind that runs deep." Through the kitchen window, Beau caught a glimpse of Lillian hanging laundry on the line. Even from a distance, he could see the careful precision of her movements, the way she shook out each garment before pinning it to dry. She wore a simple blue dress, practical and well-made, but clearly tailored for someone with limited means. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and when she turned to pick up another sheet from the basket, he saw the profile that had struck him so forcefully at the train station. Elegant despite her circumstances, dignified despite his rejection. She'd been beautiful in that moment when she'd stepped off the train. Her traveling dress pressed and her posture straight, despite what must have been days of uncomfortable travel. He'd felt something stir in his chest, a recognition of feminine grace that he hadn't experienced since Catherine. Then she'd spoken, her voice clear and honest as she'd explained her situation, and he'd shut down that feeling so completely that he'd surprised himself with his own coldness. "What's her story?" he found himself asking, though he immediately regretted the question. Martha's eyebrows rose slightly. She was a schoolteacher back in Ohio, taught children from ages 6 to 16, in a one-room schoolhouse. By all accounts, she was beloved by her students and their families. Then she took sick with fever, scarlet fever, she thinks, and when she recovered, the doctor told her she'd never be able to have children. The story hit Beau like a physical blow. He'd assumed her infertility was simply a matter of unfortunate biology, not the result of illness that had stolen her future. The parallel to his own loss made his chest tighten. "The family started pulling their children from her school," Martha continued. "Said it wasn't proper for a barren woman to be teaching other people's children, as if her condition might be catching, or as if she'd somehow become less worthy of respect. She lost her position, her reputation, her place in the community. That's when she decided to come west." Beau stared out at the woman who was now feeding scraps to the chickens, her movements patient and methodical. He'd judged her quickly, seen only what she couldn't provide rather than what she might offer. The realization made him uncomfortable, like a shirt that didn't fit quite right. "She's educated then," he said, surprised by his own interest. "More than educated. She's got 3 books in her room. Shakespeare, Dickens, and some poetry I don't recognize. Speaks a bit of French too. I heard her talking to the horses in it yesterday. Said it calms them." The image of Lillian speaking French to his horses struck Beau as both ridiculous and oddly charming. Catherine had been educated too, but in the ornamental way of wealthy women. Piano, painting, enough literature to make polite conversation. Lillian's education seemed different, more practical and thorough. "She can't stay," he said again, but the conviction had gone out of his voice. "Why not?" Martha challenged. "She's paying her way with work. She's not causing trouble, and Lord knows this house could use a woman's touch. When's the last time you ate a proper meal? When's the last time someone cared enough to ask how you're sleeping?" The truth was, Beau had noticed the changes in the 3 days since Lillian's arrival. The house smelled different, like baking bread and lemon oil, instead of dust and neglect. His shirts were pressed with a care that Martha's aging hands couldn't quite manage anymore. There were wildflowers in a jar on the kitchen table, and the windows sparkled with cleanliness that let in more light than he'd seen in months. "It's not appropriate," he said, grasping for objections that felt increasingly hollow. "An unmarried woman living in my house. People will talk." "People talk anyway," Martha replied with characteristic bluntness. "They talk about how you've been half dead for 3 years, how you work yourself to exhaustion rather than come home to an empty house, how you've turned down every eligible woman from here to Butte." Maybe it's time they had something better to talk about. Before Beau, who could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention to the main road. A rider was approaching at a steady trot, and as he drew closer, Bo recognized the weathered face and star-shaped badge of Sheriff Tom Morrison. The lawman's expression was grim, and his usual friendly wave was absent. "Morning, Bo," Morrison said as he reined in his horse. "Martha," he touched his hat brim in greeting. "I'm afraid I've got some troubling news. Mind if we talk private?" Bo nodded, stepping away from the porch toward the corral. Martha retreated to the kitchen, but not before shooting him a meaningful look that clearly communicated that their conversation about Lillian was far from over. "What's the problem, Tom?" Bo asked. Though he suspected he already knew, rumors had been circulating for weeks about strangers in the area, men asking questions about property boundaries and ranch operations. "Had another ranch hit last night," Morrison said, his voice low. "The Hendersons, about 20 miles south of here. Cattle rustled, but that's not the worst of it. They tried to burn the family out of their house. If Henry Henderson hadn't been awake with a sick calf, they might have succeeded." Bo's blood ran cold. The Hendersons were good people, struggling to make their small ranch profitable. They had 3 young children and barely enough savings to rebuild if they lost everything. "Any idea who's behind it?" Bo asked, though he suspected the answer. "Same group that's been working the territory for the past 2 months. They call themselves the Clearwater Company, but they're nothing but organized thieves. They target successful ranches, steal what they can, and try to drive out the families so they can buy the land cheap from desperate sellers. Why target the Hendersons? Their spread isn't worth much." Morrison's expression darkened. "Word is, they're not just after the small ranches anymore. They're moving up to bigger targets, ranches with real value." His gaze met Bo's directly. "Ranches like yours." The implications hit Bo like a physical blow. The Remington Ranch was one of the most prosperous in the territory, with valuable water rights and prime grazing land. It would be a significant prize for organized criminals. "What do you need from me?" Bo asked. "Keep your eyes open, double your security if you can." And Bo— Morrison paused, glancing toward the house where Lillian could be seen through the window, kneading dough. At the kitchen table, "You might want to consider sending any women or children away until this blows over. These men don't seem to have much conscience about hurting innocent people." As if summoned by their conversation, Lillian emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray with 2 steaming cups. She approached them with the same quiet dignity that had characterized her every action since her arrival. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice clear and pleasant, "I thought you might enjoy some fresh coffee. It's a cold morning." Morrison accepted the cup with obvious pleasure, and Bo noticed how the sheriff's stern expression softened in Lillian's presence. She had that effect on people, a way of bringing out their better natures without seeming to try. "Thank you kindly, miss," Morrison said. "That's very thoughtful." Lillian smiled, a gentle expression that transformed her face from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. "You're very welcome, Sheriff. I hope your business here isn't too troubling." There was something in her tone, a subtle indication that she understood the gravity of their conversation without needing to be told. Bo found himself studying her face, looking for signs of fear or fragility. Instead, he saw calm intelligence and a strength that seemed to come from having weathered difficulties before. "Nothing that can't be handled," Morrison assured her, though his eyes met Bo's over the coffee cup with clear concern. As Lillian returned to the house, both men watched her go. She moved with purpose, but without hurry. Her presence somehow making the entire ranch feel more settled and secure. "That's the woman you turned away?" Morrison asked quietly. Bo nodded, suddenly feeling foolish. "Bo Remington," the sheriff said, shaking his head. "You might be the smartest businessman in the territory, but you're about the dumbest man when it comes to recognizing a good thing when it's standing right in front of you." As Morrison mounted his horse and rode away, Bo remained by the corral, watching Lillian through the kitchen window. She was back to her bread-making, her movements efficient and graceful. Martha sat at the kitchen table, clearly enjoying female companionship after years of managing a household of men. For the first time since Catherine's death, the house looked like a home rather than just a place where he slept. The realization was both comforting and terrifying. He'd built his walls carefully, brick by brick, sorrow by sorrow. The idea of letting someone else inside those walls, of risking that kind of pain again, made his hands shake slightly as he finished his coffee. But as he watched Lillian pause, in her work to look out at the mountains, her expression thoughtful and serene, Bo found himself wondering if perhaps the greater risk lay not in opening his heart, but in keeping it closed forever. The scream that shattered the pre-dawn quiet, said Bo, bolting upright in his bed, his heart hammering against his ribs. For a moment, disoriented by sleep, he thought he was back in that terrible night 3 years ago, when Catherine's cries had echoed through these same walls. Then reality crashed over him as he heard Lillian's voice, urgent and clear, calling for help from downstairs. He threw on his clothes and took the stairs 3 at a time, finding Lillian kneeling beside Martha's crumpled form in the kitchen. The older woman lay unconscious on the floor, her face pale as winter moonlight, her breathing shallow and labored. A shattered coffee cup lay nearby, brown liquid spreading across the wooden planks like spilled blood. "I found her like this," Lillian said, her voice steady despite the fear Bo could see in her eyes. "She was preparing breakfast when I heard the crash. I think she may have fainted, but her pulse is weak and irregular." Bo dropped to his knees, beside Martha, his hands hovering uncertainly over her still form. The woman who had raised him, who had been the constant presence in his life through every joy and sorrow, looked suddenly fragile and mortal in a way that terrified him. "We need to get her to town, to Doc Peterson," he said, starting to lift. Martha's shoulders. "No," Lillian said firmly, her hand catching his arm. "Moving her could be dangerous if she's had some kind of episode with her heart. Look at the way her lips are tinged blue, and feel how cold her hands are." Bo stared at her, struck by the authority in her voice. This wasn't the quiet, deferential woman who had been tiptoeing around his ranch for the past week. This was someone who knew exactly what she was doing. "Help me get her to the sofa in the parlor," Lillian continued. "We'll make her comfortable there, and then you can ride for the doctor. But we move her carefully, supporting her head and keeping her level." Together, they lifted Martha with painstaking care, Lillian directing their movements with the confidence of someone who had clearly dealt with medical emergencies before. Once Martha was settled on the parlor sofa, Lillian began checking her pulse again, timing it against the grandfather clock in the corner. "Her heartbeat is irregular," she murmured, more to herself than to Bo, "and her breathing is too shallow. She needs laudanum for the pain and digitalis if Doc Peterson has it." "How do you know all this?" Bo asked, amazed by her competence. Shadow passed across Lillian's face. "When I was teaching, I was often the only educated person in the community. I had to learn basic medical care for emergencies, children getting hurt during recess, accidents during harvest time, illnesses. When the nearest doctor was days away." She touched Martha's forehead gently, "And when the scarlet fever came through my town, I helped nurse the sick. I learned more about medicine than I ever wanted to know." The vulnerability in her voice, the hint of old pain, made Bo see her in an entirely new light. She wasn't just a woman displaced by circumstances. She was someone who had taken on responsibilities, who had cared for others when caring came with real risks. "I'll ride for Doc Peterson," he said, starting toward the door. "Wait," Lillian's voice stopped him. "Before you go, help me gather some things. Martha's going to be in considerable discomfort when she wakes, and we need to be prepared." For the next few minutes, Bo found himself following Lillian's quiet instructions, fetching clean linens, filling a basin with cool water, and helping her arrange everything within easy reach of the sofa. Her movements were economical and sure, and he noticed how her presence seemed to bring calm to the crisis rather than adding to the chaos. "There's something else," she said as he prepared to leave. "Martha mentioned yesterday that she'd been having episodes of dizziness and chest pain. She made me promise not to tell you because she didn't want you to worry." Guilt hit Bo like A physical blow. He'd been so wrapped up in his own problems, so focused on maintaining his emotional distance, that he'd failed to notice that the woman who had cared for him his entire life was suffering. If Lillian hadn't been here, if Martha had collapsed while alone, "This is my fault," he said, the words coming out rougher than he'd intended. "I should have seen that she was unwell." "It's not your fault," Lillian replied, her hand touching his arm briefly. "Martha is proud and stubborn. She would have hidden her symptoms from anyone. But she's strong too, and she has people who care about her. That matters more than you might think." The simple comfort in her words, the way she included herself among the people who cared about Martha, struck Bo unexpectedly. When had this near stranger become someone who belonged in his household? Someone whose presence felt necessary rather than intrusive? As he rode hard toward town, pushing his horse through the grey morning light, Bo found his thoughts returning again and again to the competent way Lillian had handled the emergency. She hadn't panicked or fallen apart as he might have expected from a gently bred woman. Instead, she'd taken charge with a quiet authority that had made him trust her judgment instinctively. Doc Peterson, a grizzled man in his 60s who had been delivering babies and setting bones in the territory for 30 years, confirmed Lillian's assessment when he examined Martha an hour later. "Heart palpitations," he pronounced grimly. "Could be brought on by overwork, stress, or just the natural wearing down that comes with age. She needs complete rest for at least 2 weeks, maybe longer." "Will she recover?" Bo asked, dreading the answer. "Hard to say for certain. The heart's a mysterious thing, but she's got good care." Peterson glanced toward the kitchen, where Lillian was preparing a special broth he'd recommended. "And that young lady seems to know what she's about. Where'd you find her?" Bo hesitated, unsure how to explain Lillian's presence. "She came west looking for work. Martha took her in." Peterson's weathered face creased in a knowing smile. "Did she now? Well, you're lucky to have her. I've seen trained nurses with less sense about sick care than that girl showed today." After the doctor left, Bo returned to the parlor to find Lillian sitting beside Martha's sofa, holding the older woman's hand while she slept. The afternoon light streaming through the windows highlighted the gentle concentration on Lillian's face as she monitored Martha's breathing. "How is she?" he asked quietly, resting more comfortably. "Her color is better and her pulse has steadied somewhat." Lillian looked up at him, and he was struck again by the clarity and intelligence in her eyes. "But she's going to need constant care for quite some time." The doctor was right about complete rest. The implications of that statement settled over Bo like a heavy blanket. Martha had been managing his household for decades, cooking, cleaning, managing supplies, overseeing the domestic side of ranch operations. Without her, he would be lost. "I can handle her care," Lillian said softly, as if reading his thoughts. "I know you have reservations about my staying here, but Martha needs someone with her around the clock for the next few weeks. I can provide that care, and I can keep the household running in the meantime." Bo stared at her, recognizing the moment for what it was, a turning point where his carefully maintained emotional distance would either have to bend or break entirely. Accepting her help would mean acknowledging that he needed her, that her presence had become valuable to him in ways that went beyond simple household management. "Why?" he asked finally. "Why would you want to stay and take care of a woman you barely know, in the house of a man who rejected you?" Lillian was quiet for a long moment, her gaze returning to Martha's sleeping face. "Because she was kind to me when kindness was scarce," she said finally. "Because she made me feel welcome when I had nowhere else to go. And because," she met his eyes directly, "because this feels like home, in a way that nowhere has felt like home for a very long time." The honesty in her words hit him harder than any argument or plea could have. She wasn't asking for his charity or trying to manipulate her way into his household. She was simply stating a truth that resonated in his own chest, that this ranch, this house, these people had become something precious to her. "All right," he said, the words coming out before he could second-guess them. "Stay. Take care of Martha. But this is temporary until she's well again." Lillian nodded, accepting the limitation without argument. Of course, temporary. But as Bo looked at her sitting there in his parlor, her dark hair catching the afternoon light, her presence somehow making the room feel more alive and welcoming than it had in years, he found himself wondering if anything about Lillian Grace Mercer was ever going to be truly temporary. Martha stirred on the sofa, her eyes fluttering open, and Lillian immediately leaned forward, her voice gentle and reassuring as she explained what had happened. Watching them together, the elderly woman who had been his anchor and the younger woman who was rapidly becoming something he didn't dare name, Bo felt something shift in his chest, like ice beginning to crack after a long, hard winter. The change frightened him almost as much as it comforted him. But as evening fell and Lillian moved quietly through his house, tending to Martha and somehow managing to prepare dinner as well, he couldn't bring himself to regret his decision to let her stay. 3 days into Martha's recovery, Bo discovered Lillian in the small room above the kitchen, seated at the narrow window with a worn slate balanced on her knees. She was writing something in careful script, her lips moving silently as she worked. When she noticed him in the doorway, she quickly set the slate aside, but not before he glimpsed neat rows of mathematical equations. "I didn't mean to disturb you," he said, suddenly aware that he was intruding on her private space. "I was checking to see if you needed anything for Martha. She's sleeping comfortably," Lillian replied, rising from her chair with the fluid grace that characterized all her movements. "I was just keeping my mind sharp." Bo's gaze fell on the slate she'd tried to hide. "May I?" After a moment's hesitation, she handed it to him. The surface was covered with arithmetic problems, long division, fractions, geometric calculations. But these weren't simple exercises. They were the kind of advanced mathematics that would challenge even educated men. "You taught older students," he said. "Not really a question. Up to age 16. Some were preparing for normal school or business. College." Her voice carried a note of pride that she couldn't quite suppress. "I always believed that rural children deserved the same quality of education as their city counterparts." Bo studied the slate more carefully, noting the precise handwriting, the logical progression of the problems. "Where did you learn mathematics like this?" A soft smile crossed Lillian's face, transforming her features with a warmth he hadn't seen before. "My father was a surveyor before he became a teacher himself. He said that mathematics was the language of truth, that numbers couldn't lie or flatter or deceive. He taught me that precision in thinking led to precision in living." Bo caught the past tense. "He died when I was 19. Pneumonia." The sadness in her voice was old and well-worn, like a stone polished smooth by years of handling. "My mother passed 2 years later. That's when I took over his school." The picture that emerged was of a young woman shouldering adult responsibilities, caring for an entire community's children while grieving her own losses. It explained the quiet competence he'd observed, the way she seemed comfortable with burdens that would overwhelm others. "Tell me about your students," he found himself saying, surprised by his own curiosity. Lillian's face lit up with genuine joy. "Oh, they were wonderful. There was little Emma Patterson, only 6 years old, but already reading at a 4th grade level. And Marcus Webb, who had such difficulty with letters but could solve mathematical puzzles that stumped children twice. His age. Sarah Johnson wanted to be a doctor. Imagine that, a girl from rural Ohio dreaming of medical school." As she spoke, her entire demeanor changed. The careful reserve that usually characterized her interactions disappeared, replaced by animated enthusiasm. She gestured as she talked, her eyes bright with memory, and Bo found himself captivated by this glimpse of who she'd been before loss and scandal had taught her to guard herself. "You love teaching," he said. "More than anything, the light." In her eyes dimmed slightly. It was my calling, my purpose. When I lost it, she trailed off, gathering herself. Well, one learns to adapt, but Bo could see the depth of that loss in her expression, the way her hands unconsciously tightened around the slate. Teaching hadn't just been her profession, it had been her identity, her way of contributing to the world. Having it stripped away must have been devastating. The children who were pulled from your school, he said carefully. That must have been difficult. Pain flickered across her features. The hardest part wasn't losing my position. It was seeing confusion in their faces when their parents told them they couldn't come to school anymore. Some of them cried. They didn't understand why their teacher was suddenly unfit to teach them. The injustice of it struck Bo forcefully. This woman, who clearly had both the knowledge and the heart to educate children, had been cast aside because of a physical condition beyond her control. The waste of it, the cruel short-sightedness, made anger rise in his chest. Their parents were fools, he said bluntly. Lillian looked startled by his vehemence. They were protecting their children as they saw fit. Fear makes people act in ways they might not otherwise choose. Her capacity for understanding, even toward those who had wronged her, impressed him. Catherine had been generous and kind, but she'd lived a sheltered life that hadn't required such forgiveness. Lillian's compassion had been tested by real hardship and had emerged stronger. From downstairs came the sound of Martha calling, and Lillian immediately set aside the slate to respond. But as she moved toward the door, Bo caught her arm gently. Lillian. The use of her first name felt strange on his tongue, too intimate, and yet somehow right. You shouldn't have to hide your intelligence or pretend to be less than you are. Not here. She searched his face as if looking for mockery or judgment, and finding none. Thank you, she said softly. That means more than you know. As they descended the stairs together, Bo found himself seeing his house through new eyes. The ranch had always been focused on practical concerns, cattle, land management, profit margins. But there was room here for other things too. Room for books and learning, for the kind of stimulating conversation he hadn't realized he'd been missing. Martha was indeed awake, looking much better than she had since her collapse. Color had returned to her cheeks, and her eyes were alert and interested as she watched them enter the parlor. You two look like you've been having a serious discussion, she observed, with the directness that had characterized her entire life. I was admiring Lillian's mathematical skills, Bo said, earning a surprised look from both women. Oh, she's a clever one, Martha agreed. Yesterday she helped me calculate exactly how much fabric we'll need for new curtains in the dining room, and she did it all in her head, faster than I could do it with pencil and paper. The measurements were straightforward, Lillian said modestly, but Bo could see she was pleased by the recognition. Nonsense. Smart is smart, and you shouldn't apologize for it. Martha's tone brooked no argument. Bo, you should see the way she organized the pantry. Everything's sorted and labeled, with a written inventory that includes quantities and estimated dates when we'll need to reorder supplies. It's the most efficient system I've ever seen. Bo glanced at Lillian, who was blushing slightly at the praise. He was beginning to understand that her quiet competence extended far beyond nursing care and household management. She approached everything with the same methodical intelligence that had made her a successful teacher. Speaking of which, Martha continued, I've been thinking about winter preparations. We usually start preserving vegetables and fruits in another month, but with my heart acting up, I won't be able to manage the workload myself. I'd be happy to help, Lillian offered immediately. I spent several summers helping my neighbor, Mrs. Garrison, with her canning. She was known throughout the county for her preserves. Excellent, Martha said with satisfaction. And Bo, you'll need to make sure we have adequate firewood cut and split. Last winter was mild, but I have a feeling this one might be harsh. As they discussed practical preparations for the coming cold months, Bo realized how naturally Lillian had been included in their planning. Somewhere over the past week, she had stopped being a temporary guest and had become part of the household's functioning. The transition had been so gradual that he hadn't noticed it happening until now. After Martha dozed off again and Lillian returned to the kitchen to prepare lunch, Bo found himself lingering in the parlor, thinking about the woman upstairs, who did mathematics for pleasure, and whose eyes lit up when she talked about children's potential. She was nothing like what he'd expected from a mail-order bride, nothing like the desperate or conniving women he'd imagined would answer such advertisements. The realization troubled him because it forced him to confront his own assumptions and prejudices. He dismissed her based on one limitation, never bothering to learn about her strengths or her character. The woman he was getting to know bore no resemblance to the woman he'd rejected at the train station. From the kitchen came the sounds of quiet industry, the rhythm of chopping vegetables, the soft clink of dishes being arranged. For the first time in 3 years, his house felt alive with purposeful activity rather than echoing with emptiness. And at the center of that change was a woman whose slate full of mathematical equations had revealed depths he was only beginning to understand. The injured calf lay on its side in the barn, its breathing labored and its left hind leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Bo crouched beside the animal, his experienced hands running over the brake, while Tom Brennan stood nearby with a grim expression, stepped in a prairie dog hole while the herd was moving to the north pasture. Tom explained. Clean break, but a bad one. Might be kinder to put her down. Bo nodded reluctantly. A broken leg on a young calf usually meant death. The animal couldn't keep up with the herd, and the cost of treating it often exceeded its value. It was a harsh reality of ranch life that he'd accepted years ago. I'll get my rifle, he said. Standing. Wait. Lillian's voice came from the barn doorway, soft but firm. She approached slowly, her movements careful so as not to startle the injured animal. May I look at her first? Bo started to object. This wasn't woman's work, and certainly not something for someone with Lillian's refined background. But something in her expression stopped him. She was already kneeling beside the calf, her hands hovering over the animal without quite touching. Hello, sweet girl, she murmured in a tone so gentle it seemed to calm the calf immediately. Then, to Bo's amazement, she began speaking in what sounded like French, her voice melodic and soothing. The calf's breathing steadied, and its wild eyes fixed on Lillian's face with something approaching trust. Where did you learn to speak? French to animals? Bo asked, genuinely curious. A small smile played at the corners of Lillian's mouth. My grandmother was French-Canadian. She always said that animals understood the language of the heart better than the language of the mind, and that French was closer to the heart than English. I don't know if that's true, but I've found that horses and cattle do seem to respond to it. She continued her soft conversation with the calf, while her hands moved expertly over the injured leg. Bo watched, fascinated, as the animal remained completely still under her touch. A trust that was remarkable, considering its pain and fear. The break is clean, she said finally, looking up at Bo, and it's not completely displaced. With the right splinting and care, she could heal well enough to live a normal life. Lillian, Bo said gently, the cost of veterinary care alone would be more than she's worth. And the time required to nurse her back to health. I could do it, she interrupted quietly. I've set bones before. During the fever outbreak in my town, when Doc Morrison was overwhelmed with patients, I learned to handle fractures and other injuries. Animals aren't so different from people when it comes to broken bones. Tom Brennan raised his eyebrows. You've set broken bones? Several. A boy who fell from a hayloft and broke his arm. An elderly woman who slipped on ice and fractured her wrist. The principles are the same, whether the patient has 2 legs or 4. Bo studied her face, seeing the quiet confidence there. Everything he'd learned about Lillian over the past week suggested that when she said she could do something, she meant it. Even if you could set the bone properly, he said, caring for an injured calf is a full-time job for weeks. You're all ready. taking care of Martha and managing the household. She could recover in the small paddock behind the house, Lillian said, her hand still resting gently on the calf's neck. I could check on her throughout the day while tending to other duties. And Tom, doesn't she belong to the heifer that lost her calf last spring? Tom nodded slowly. Bessie, poor thing, grieved something fierce when her baby died. Been following the other mothers around ever since. Like she's looking for something to care for. Then this could help them both, Lillian said simply. Sometimes, healing isn't just about fixing what's broken. Sometimes it's about giving purpose to what's been lost. The wisdom in her words struck Bo unexpectedly. She wasn't just talking about the cow and calf. She was talking about healing in general, about finding new meaning after loss. The parallel to his own situation wasn't lost on him. All right, he heard himself saying. We'll try it your way. What followed was the most remarkable display of animal care Bo had ever witnessed. Lillian directed Tom to gather specific materials, straight wooden slats, clean cloth strips, and a special mixture of herbs she requested from Martha's kitchen garden. She worked with the same quiet competence she'd shown during Martha's medical crisis, her movements sure and gentle. The splinting process took nearly an hour, with Lillian maintaining a constant stream of soothing French as she worked. The calf remained calm throughout, as if it understood that this person was trying to help rather than harm. There, she said finally, sitting back on her heels. She'll need to stay still for several weeks, but the bone should heal straight. If we're careful. They moved the calf to the small paddock, where Bessie immediately approached with obvious interest. The reunion was touching. The mother cow began licking her adopted charge immediately, her maternal instincts fully engaged. I'll be damned, Tom muttered. Never seen anything like it. As they walked back toward the house, Bo found himself studying Lillian with new respect. Each day seemed to reveal another layer of her capabilities, another skill that contradicted his initial assessment of her as simply a displaced schoolteacher. Where did you learn veterinary care? He asked. Necessity, mostly. In a small farming community, everyone learns to tend injuries in both people and animals. But I also spent time with our local horse doctor when I was younger. He said I had steady hands and a calm temperament, qualities that served well in both teaching and healing. They paused at the paddock fence to watch Bessie fussing over her new charge. The calf was already trying to stand, though Lillian quickly discouraged the effort with more gentle French murmurs. She'll need monitoring around the clock for the first few days, Lillian said. I can check on her during the night without disturbing anyone else. That's not necessary, Bo protested. One of the ranch hands can... Animals heal better with consistent care from the same person, she interrupted gently. They learn to trust one voice, one touch. It makes a difference. As if to prove her point, the calf's eyes tracked Lillian's movements, and when she stepped away from the fence, the young animal gave a soft call that sounded remarkably like a plea for her to return. Besides, Lillian added with a small smile, I haven't been sleeping well anyway. It will give me something useful to do during the restless hours. Her admission of sleeplessness surprised him. She always seemed so composed during the day that he'd assumed she rested easily at night. Bad dreams, he asked. Sometimes, but mostly just thoughts about the past, about the future, about where I belong in the world. She glanced at him, sideways. I suspect you understand something about restless nights. He did understand, more than he cared to admit. Since Catherine's death, sleep had often eluded him, leaving him pacing the house in the dark hours, wrestling with memories and regrets. The calf will be a good distraction, he said finally. Yes, and if she heals well, it will prove that sometimes what seems broken beyond repair can be made whole again. Again, Bo felt the deeper meaning in her words. They were still talking about the calf, but they were also talking about healing. In general, about the possibility of recovery from wounds that seemed too deep to mend. That evening, as Bo finished his paperwork in the study, He could see Lillian through the window, sitting on a stool beside the paddock in the gathering. Dusk. She was reading aloud. He could see her lips moving, though he couldn't hear the words, and both the calf and Bessie were listening with apparent attention. The sight stirred something in his chest that he'd thought dead and buried. Here was a woman who brought healing wherever she went, to Martha's failing health, to his neglected household, to injured animals, and perhaps, if he was brave enough to let her, to his own wounded heart. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. For 3 years, he'd convinced himself that he was better off alone, that the risk of loss was too great to justify opening himself to love again. But watching Lillian tend to a broken calf with the same gentle care, she showed everything in her path. He began to wonder if perhaps the greater risk lay in remaining closed off from the healing she seemed to offer so naturally. The discovery happened by accident. Lillian had been cleaning the upstairs rooms when she noticed a small door hidden behind an old wardrobe in what had once been the nursery. Curiosity compelled her to move the heavy furniture, revealing a narrow staircase that led to the attic space above. She climbed the dusty steps with a lamp in hand, expecting to find nothing more than discarded furniture and forgotten storage. Instead, her light fell upon something that made her breath catch in her throat, a beautifully crafted wooden cradle, its surface polished to a warm honey glow despite the years of neglect. The cradle sat in a shaft of afternoon sunlight streaming through a small window, and around it were carefully arranged other items, tiny clothes folded with precision, a hand-carved rocking horse, children's books with well-worn spines. It was a shrine to dreams that had died, a testament to hopes that had been too painful to discard, but too precious to display. Lillian knelt beside the cradle, her fingers tracing the intricate carvings along its edges. Hearts and flowers, birds, in flight, all worked into the wood, with the kind of loving detail that spoke of anticipation and joy. This wasn't furniture purchased from a catalogue. This was something crafted by hand, probably by Beau himself, during the long months of waiting for his child's arrival. She was so absorbed in examining the craftsmanship that she didn't hear footsteps on the attic stairs until a shadow fell across the floor. She looked up to find Beau standing in the doorway, his face a mask of such raw pain that she immediately understood she had trespassed on sacred ground. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, starting to rise. "I was cleaning and I found the door. I didn't mean to intrude." "Don't." His voice was rough, barely controlled. "Don't apologize for finding what I was too much of a coward to face." He stepped into the attic, his movements stiff and careful, as if he were walking through a minefield. His eyes took in the carefully preserved nursery with an expression that broke Lillian's heart. "I made the cradle myself," he said finally, his voice so quiet she had to strain to hear it. "Spent months on it, working in the barn after the day's chores were done. Catherine used to tease me about the time I was taking, said the baby would be walking before I finished." Lillian remained motionless, understanding that she was witnessing something profoundly private. A man confronting grief he'd buried rather than processed. She picked out all the clothes, Beau continued, his hand hovering over a tiny white gown. Sewed most of them herself, though her stitches were never as neat as she wanted them to be. She'd rip out seams and start over, determined that our baby would have the most beautiful things. "What was his name?" Lillian asked softly. "James, after my father." Beau's voice cracked slightly. He was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, beautiful dark hair like his mother's. He just never took a breath. The cord was wrapped around his neck. Doc Peterson said it happens sometimes, that there was nothing anyone could have done. The silence that followed was heavy with old pain and newer understanding. Lillian could see the weight Beau had been carrying, not just the loss of his child, but the guilt and what-ifs that plague every parent who loses a baby. "Catherine blamed herself," Beau said, sinking down beside the cradle. "Said if she'd been stronger, if she'd done something different. I tried to tell her it wasn't her fault, but she wouldn't listen. The grief consumed her, and 3 days later, she just gave up." Her heart simply stopped beating. "Oh, Bo." The words came out as barely a whisper. Lillian understood now why he'd been so adamant about not wanting a wife who couldn't bear children. He wasn't just protecting himself from disappointment, he was protecting himself from reliving the worst experience of his life. "I came up here every day for months after the funeral," he admitted. "Sat in that rocking chair and held his clothes, trying to imagine what he would have looked like, what kind of man he would have grown up to be. Then one day, I realized I was torturing myself, so I stopped coming. Locked the door and tried to forget. But you didn't throw anything away. Couldn't. It felt like erasing them, like saying their lives didn't matter." He picked up a small knitted booty, his large hands cradling it with infinite gentleness. "So I just hid it all instead." Lillian watched him struggle with emotions he'd clearly never fully processed. The man who commanded thousands of acres and dozens of employees was reduced to a broken father holding his dead child's clothing. "May I tell you something?" she asked carefully. He nodded, not trusting his voice. "After I learned I could never have children, I used to visit the school playground after hours," she said. "I'd sit on the steps and imagine all the children I would never teach, never hold, never rock to sleep. I thought about their names, their personalities, what they might accomplish in life. It felt like mourning people who had never existed." Bo's eyes met hers, recognition flashing between them. "The difference is," Lillian continued, "James did exist. He was real, he was loved, and he mattered. This nursery isn't a shrine to failure, it's a testament to love. The fact that you made all of this with your own hands, that Catherine sewed these clothes with such care, that speaks to the depth of your love for him." "It still hurts," Bo said simply. "It should hurt. Love like that doesn't just disappear because the person you love is gone, but holding on to pain isn't the same as honoring memory." She reached for one of the children's books, opening it to reveal an inscription in careful feminine handwriting. "For our darling James, may you love stories as much as Mama and Papa love you. Catherine Remington, 1881. She was already reading. "To him," Lillian observed with a soft smile, "even before he was born. Every night. Said it was important for babies to hear their parents' voices." Bo's own smile was watery, but genuine. She had his whole education planned out. Which books we'd read first, when we'd start teaching him to ride, how we'd explain the ranch business to him. She sounds like she would have been a wonderful mother. The best. He was quiet for a long moment, then looked directly at Lillian. "I've been afraid that loving someone else would mean forgetting them, that moving forward would be a betrayal of what we had." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Lillian understood that he wasn't just talking about theoretical future love. He was talking about the feelings that had been growing between them, feelings that both of them had been afraid to acknowledge. "Love isn't finite," she said gently. "Having room in your heart for new people doesn't diminish the space reserved for those you've lost. James and Catherine will always be part of you, but that doesn't mean there isn't room for others." Bo studied her face in the lamplight, seeing not just understanding, but wisdom born of her own losses. "How did you become so wise about grief?" "By living through it. By learning that survival sometimes means accepting that happiness and sorrow can coexist." She gestured toward the nursery around them. "This room represents dreams that didn't come true the way you expected. But perhaps those dreams could take a different form." The suggestion was delicate, offered without pressure or expectation. Lillian wasn't asking for promises or declarations. She was simply pointing out possibilities, opening doors that had been closed by pain and fear. As they sat together in the dusty attic surrounded by remnants of love and loss, something fundamental shifted between them. The barriers that grief had erected began to crack, letting in light that had been shut out for too long. Outside, the first rumors of organized land thieves were spreading through the territory, but in that moment, neither of them was thinking about external threats. They were focused on the more intimate danger of letting someone pass the walls they'd built around their hearts, and the even greater risk of keeping those walls intact forever. The evening after their conversation in the attic, Bo found Lillian in his study, sitting at his desk with a small wooden box open before her. Inside, neatly tied with a faded blue ribbon, was a stack of letters written in Catherine's flowing script. Lillian looked up guiltily when he entered. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, starting to close the box. "I was looking for the household ledger and found these instead. I shouldn't have—" "It's all right," Bo said, surprising himself with how calm he felt. Yesterday, discovering someone, reading Catherine's private letters, would have sent him into a rage. Now, after their conversation in the nursery, the idea felt less like a violation and more like sharing. "Those are the letters she wrote to me during our courtship." Lillian's hands stilled on the box lid. "They're beautiful. Her handwriting is so elegant. She wrote to me every day for 6 months before we married," Bo said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "My mother insisted on a proper courtship period, even though Catherine's family ranch bordered ours and we'd known each other since childhood. May I?" Lillian gestured toward the letters, and after a moment's hesitation, Bo nodded. She lifted the top letter carefully, her eyes scanning the first few lines. "My dearest Bo," she read aloud, "Papa says I'm being too forward writing to you. So often, but I cannot help myself. When I think of our future together, my heart feels too full to contain all the happiness." Lillian paused, looking up at him. "She loved you very much. We grew up together. She was my best friend before she became my wife." Bo's voice was steady, free of the pain that usually accompanied memories of Catherine. "We planned everything together. The ranch expansion, the house renovations, our children's futures. She wanted 4 babies, 2 boys and 2 girls. "That sounds wonderful," Lillian said simply, and Bo was struck by the absence of jealousy or resentment in her tone. Another woman might have felt threatened by the depth of his devotion to his first wife, but Lillian seemed to understand that his love for Catherine was part of what made him capable of deep feeling. "Read another one?" he found himself saying. Lillian selected a letter from deeper in the stack. "My darling husband-to-be, I spent today helping Mama with the garden, and all I could think about was the vegetable patch we'll plant behind our own house. I have such plans for it. Rows of beans and corn, herbs for cooking, and flowers everywhere. I want our home to be full of growing things, full of life and color and beauty." "She was always planning," Bo said with a fond smile. "She had notebooks, full of ideas for the house, sketches of how she wanted the rooms arranged, lists of improvements we'd make each year. Did you make the garden she wanted? Started it the spring after we married. She was so excited, ordering seeds from catalogs, reading everything she could find about soil preparation and companion planting." His expression grew wistful. "She never got to see it fully grown. We planted it just weeks before she died. Is it still there? Overgrown now. Martha tries to keep up with it, but she doesn't have Catherine's touch. Everything Catherine planted flourished. She had a gift for growing things." Lillian was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the edge of one of the letters. "Would you like help restoring it? I worked in my parents' garden for years. I know something about coaxing life from the soil." The offer was made casually, but Bo sensed the deeper meaning behind it. She wasn't trying to replace Catherine or erase her memory. She was offering to tend something Catherine had loved, to honor her memory through careful stewardship. "I'd like that," he said, and meant it. They spent the next hour reading through more letters, Lillian's voice bringing Catherine's words to life in a way that felt healing rather than painful. She read about Catherine's excitement over choosing wallpaper for the parlor, her concerns about learning to manage a large household, her dreams of hosting Christmas dinners for their future children. "She sounds like she was full of joy," Lillian observed, setting aside the last letter. She was. Even during the difficult pregnancy, even when she was uncomfortable and worried, she found reasons to be happy. She said every day was a gift, and she was determined to appreciate them all. That's a beautiful way to live. I stopped believing that after she died, Bo admitted. For a long time, every day felt like something to be endured rather than appreciated. And now, he considered the question carefully. Now, some days are easier than others. Having Martha recovering, having the ranch running smoothly again, having... He paused, then met her eyes directly. Having you here. It's made things better. The admission hung between them, vulnerable and honest. Lillian's cheeks colored slightly, but she didn't look away. I'm glad, she said softly. I never expected to find a place where I felt useful again, where I felt valued for something other than what I couldn't provide. About that, Bo said, leaning forward in his chair, I owe you an apology for how I treated you when you first arrived. I was so focused on what I thought I needed that I couldn't see what was actually standing in front of me. You were protecting yourself, Lillian said with characteristic understanding. Given what you'd been through, it's completely understandable. No, it was cruel and short-sighted. You deserved better. Before Lillian could respond, the sound of horses approaching at speed drew their attention to the window. Through the glass, they could see torches moving in the darkness and the urgent voices of multiple riders. Bo was on his feet immediately, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle he kept mounted on the study wall. Stay here, he told Lillian, but she was already moving toward the window for a better view. It's Tom Brennan and several of the hands, she said. They look agitated. Bo stepped onto the front porch as the riders approached, Tom dismounting before his horse had fully stopped. Boss, we've got trouble, Tom said without preamble. Found signs of a large group camped about 5 miles north of here. Fresh tracks. Maybe 20 men or more. They've been watching the ranch. The Clearwater Company. Has to be, and Bo... Tom's voice dropped lower. We found this nailed to a tree near their campsite. He handed Bo a piece of paper that had been folded and refolded multiple times. In crude handwriting, it read, Remington, sell to us now for fair price, or we take what we want for free. Your choice. You have 3 days. Lillian had joined them on the porch despite his instructions to stay inside, and she read the note over his shoulder. He felt her presence like a steadying force, her calm competence somehow making the threat seem more manageable. How many men can we count on? Bo asked Tom. All the regular hands will stay and fight. That's 8 men, including myself. Jimmy's got word out to neighboring ranches, and we might get some help from them, but it'll take time for anyone to reach us. 3 days, Bo murmured, calculating. It's not much time to prepare a defense. We'll manage, Lillian said quietly, and when both men looked at her in surprise, she lifted her chin with quiet determination. I can shoot, I can tend wounds, and I can help coordinate supplies. This is my home too now, and I'm not running from a fight. The simple declaration, my home too now, hit Bo with unexpected force. Somewhere in the past weeks, this woman had decided that the ranch wasn't just a temporary refuge, but a place worth defending. She'd chosen to stand with him, not out of obligation or desperation, but out of loyalty to the life they'd been building together. As Tom and the other hands rode off to secure the property and gather intelligence, Bo and Lillian returned to the study. The letters from Catherine still lay scattered on the desk, but they no longer seemed like artifacts from a lost past. Instead, they felt like blessings from someone who had loved this place and would want it protected. We should put these away safely, Lillian said, beginning to gather the correspondence. Yes, Bo agreed. But as she tied the blue ribbon around the stack, he added, but not because I'm trying to forget, because I want to make sure they're preserved for the future. She smiled at him then, understanding the significance of the distinction. He wasn't hiding from his past anymore. He was honoring it while making room for whatever came next. And what came next, he was beginning to hope, might include the remarkable woman who had brought healing to his house and was now prepared to defend it alongside him. The letter arrived on the second day of their preparations, delivered by a well-dressed gentleman from the Territorial Bank who seemed uncomfortable with his mission. Bo found Lillian in the kitchen, where she'd been organizing medical supplies and ammunition with the same methodical efficiency she brought to everything else. "Missy Mercer," the banker said, removing his hat. "I'm Harold Whitman from First Territorial Bank in Helena. I have some rather urgent business to discuss with you." Lillian looked up from her inventory, flour dusting her hands and concern creasing her brow. "I'm afraid there must be some mistake, Mr. Whitman. I don't have any business with your bank." "Actually, you do." Whitman produced an official-looking document from his leather satchel. "I've been trying to locate you for several months on behalf of your late uncle's estate. Jeremiah Mercer of Chicago?" The color drained from Lillian's face. "Uncle Jeremiah, but we weren't close. I hadn't heard from him in years. Nevertheless, he remembered you in his will. Quite generously, in fact." Whitman cleared his throat nervously. "Miss Mercer, your uncle has left you his entire estate, including significant holdings in railroad stock, real estate investments, and liquid assets. You are, by my conservative estimation, worth approximately $250,000. The flour container slipped from Lillian's hands, hitting the floor with a dull thud that seemed to echo through the sudden silence. Bo felt the world shift beneath his feet as the implications of Whitman's words crashed over him. "That's impossible," Lillian whispered. "Uncle Jeremiah was a clerk. He lived in a boarding house. On the contrary, your uncle was quite the businessman." Whitman explained. He invested early in railroad development and lived modestly while his assets grew substantially. His will indicates that he felt guilty about losing touch with his brother's family after your parents' deaths. This inheritance was his way of ensuring your security. Bo watched Lillian's face cycle through shock, disbelief, and dawning realization. The woman he'd thought of as displaced and dependent was actually wealthier than most territorial governors. She didn't need his protection, his ranch, or his reluctant charity. She could buy and sell operations like his without affecting her financial standing. "There are some papers that require your signature," Whitman continued, oblivious to the emotional earthquake he'd triggered, "and arrangements to be made for transferring the assets to banks here in Montana Territory, if that's your preference." Lillian looked around the kitchen as if seeing it for the first time. "I need a moment to process this, of course. I'll be staying at the hotel in town tonight. Perhaps we could meet tomorrow to discuss the details." After Whitman left, Lillian and Bo stood in the kitchen, surrounded by the preparations for a siege that suddenly seemed absurd. Why would a woman of independent means choose to stay and fight for a ranch that wasn't hers, with a man who had rejected her? "Why didn't you tell me?" Bo asked, his voice harsher than he'd intended. "Tell you what, I didn't know." Lillian's eyes flashed with the first real anger he'd seen from her. "Do you think I would have lived as I did, worked as I did, if I'd known I had a fortune sitting in some bank? But your clothes, your education, the way you carry yourself, come from being raised by parents who valued learning and dignity over wealth. My father was a teacher and surveyor, not a pauper, but we were never wealthy. I've been supporting myself since I was 19 years old." Bo ran his hands through his hair, struggling to reconcile this new information with everything he thought. He knew about their situation. So what now? You can buy yourself a mansion in San Francisco, travel to Europe, live anywhere you want. Why would you stay here? The question hung between them like an accusation. Lillian's chin lifted in a gesture he'd come to recognize as her response to challenge or hurt. "Is that what you think of me? That I've been pretending to care about this place, about Martha, about you, just to secure my position?" Her voice was quiet, but it carried an edge of pain that cut deeper than shouting would have. "That I'm some kind of opportunist playing a long game?" "I don't know what to think," Bo admitted. 3 days ago I thought you needed me. Now I find out you're wealthy enough to buy half the territory. It changes everything." Does it? Lillian stepped closer, her eyes searching his face. Does my having money change the fact that Martha was ill and needed care? Does it change the conversations we've had, the way you've begun to heal from your grief? Does it change the fact that we're about to face down a gang of thieves who want to steal everything you've worked for? The logic of her words warred with the emotional upheaval in Beau's chest. She was right. Her financial status didn't change the reality of what had grown between them, but it did change the balance of power, the nature of their relationship, his understanding of her motivations. It changes the fact that you chose to be here, he said slowly. When I thought you had nowhere else to go, your presence made sense. But now you think I'm here under false pretenses. Lillian's voice was steady, but he could see the hurt in her eyes. Beau, let me ask you something. In the past weeks, when you've felt drawn to me, when you've begun to care for me, was it because you thought I was poor and needed rescuing? The question stopped him cold. Was his attraction to her based on some misguided white knight complex? Had he only begun to open his heart because he saw her as damaged and dependent, someone who would be grateful for his attention? I thought you understood me, he said finally. I thought we understood each other because we'd both lost everything. I did lose everything, Lillian said firmly. I lost my calling, my reputation, my place in society, my dreams of a family. Money doesn't restore any of those things. Money doesn't make me less barren, Beau. It doesn't give me back the children I'll never teach or the babies I'll never hold. The stark honesty of her words hit him like a physical blow. In his shock over her inheritance, he'd forgotten that her fundamental loss, the reason she'd come west in the first place, remained unchanged. But it does give you options, he said. You could adopt children, establish a school for orphans, make a difference in ways that don't require you to settle for a man who rejected me when I first arrived, who spent weeks building walls just to tear them down again. Lillian's composure finally cracked, revealing the anger and frustration beneath. Do you think so little of yourself that you can't imagine someone choosing you when they have other options? The accusation hung in the air between them, challenging him to examine his own self-worth. Was that what this was about? His inability to believe that someone of means and education would genuinely want the life he could offer before he could. Answer, Martha's voice called from the parlor, weak but urgent. Lillian, Beau, there are riders coming and they don't look friendly. They rushed to the window to see a group of men approaching the house. Not the organized charge they'd expected, but a small delegation riding under a white flag. At their head was a man Beau recognized from wanted posters. Jake Morrison, leader of the Clearwater Company. They're early, Beau muttered, reaching for his rifle. They're not attacking, Lillian observed. That's a parley flag. Morrison wants to talk. Beau checked his weapon automatically. Probably thinks he can intimidate us into surrendering, without a fight. Maybe, Lillian said quietly. Or maybe he's heard about my inheritance and thinks he can leverage it somehow. The possibility hadn't occurred to Beau, but it made sense. News traveled fast in small communities, and a fortune like Lillian's would be common knowledge within hours of Whitman's arrival. All the more reason for you to leave, Beau said. Take the money and get as far away from here as possible. Lillian turned to face him fully, her expression resolute. I'm not leaving. Lillian, be reasonable. These men are killers. They won't hesitate to hurt you to get what they want. Then we'd better make sure they don't get it. She moved to the gun cabinet and selected a rifle with practiced ease. You seem to forget that I chose to stay here before I knew about the money. My reasons haven't changed. What are your reasons? The question came out more vulnerable than he'd intended. She paused in checking the rifle's mechanism, her eyes meeting his with unflinching honesty. Because this feels like home, because Martha needs me, because that calf in the paddock is healing under my care, because you've begun to heal too, and I'd like to see that continue. She took a breath. And because I love you, Beau Remington. Not your ranch, not your protection, not your need for me. You. The declaration hit him like lightning, illuminating truths he'd been afraid to acknowledge. She loved him, not the broken widower who needed saving or the successful rancher who could provide security, but simply him. Before he could respond, Morrison's voice carried across the yard. "Remington, we need to talk." "This conversation isn't over," Bo told Lillian, but she was already moving toward the door. "No," she agreed, "but it's going to have to wait." As they stepped onto the porch to face Morrison and his men, Bo realized that everything had changed with Whitman's revelation. The woman beside him was no longer a refugee seeking shelter. She was an independent person of means choosing to stand with him. The weight of that choice and the love that motivated it was both humbling and terrifying. The real question now wasn't whether she would stay, but whether he was brave enough to believe he deserved her choice. Jake Morrison sat his horse with the casual arrogance of a man accustomed to intimidating others into submission. He was younger than Bo had expected, perhaps 35, with the kind of lean build and quick eyes that spoke of a life lived on the wrong side of the law. Behind him, 5 armed men watched the house with the predatory stillness of wolves, sizing up their prey. "Remington," Morrison called out, his voice carrying easily across the yard. "I hear congratulations are in order. Your lady friend has come into quite a fortune." Bo felt Lillian stiffen beside him, but her voice remained steady when she replied. "Mr. Morrison, I assume. I'm afraid any business you might have is with Mr. Remington, not with me." Morrison's laugh was unpleasant. "Oh, but that's where you're wrong, Miss Mercer. You see, my associates and I have done some calculating. Your inheritance makes this little negotiation much more interesting." "State your business," Bo said, his rifle held casually but ready. "Simple enough. The lady there can afford to buy this ranch 10 times over. So here's our new offer. She pays us $50,000, and we ride away, peaceful-like. No blood, no burned buildings, no unfortunate accidents." "And if we refuse?" Lillian asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Well, that would be unfortunate. You see, we've got 20 men positioned around this ranch, and we know exactly how many hands you've got working for you. The odds aren't in your favor." Morrison's smile was cold. "Of course, if something were to happen to a wealthy lady like yourself, that inheritance would probably go to some distant relative who'd be much more reasonable about selling this place cheap." The threat was clear enough to make Bo's blood run cold. They weren't just after the ranch anymore. They were targeting Lillian specifically. "You have until dawn to decide," Morrison continued. "After that, we stop being civilized about this whole business." As the riders departed, Bo turned to find Tom Brennan emerging from the barn with Jimmy and 3 other ranch hands. Their faces were grim but determined. "How many men do they really have?" Bo asked. "Hard to say for certain," Tom replied. "We've spotted at least 15, maybe more. They've got good positions covering all the approaches to the house. Ammunition, enough for a prolonged fight, assuming we're careful with our shots." Tom glanced at Lillian. "Ma'am, with respect, maybe you should reconsider staying. This is going to get ugly." "I'm staying," Lillian said firmly. "But I want to do more than just hide in the house. What can I do to help?" Tom looked to Bo, who nodded reluctantly. "You said you can shoot. My father taught me. I'm not an expert, but I can hit what I aim at within reasonable distance." "Good enough. Jimmy, get her a rifle and plenty of ammunition. We'll need every gun we can get." As the men dispersed to check defenses and gather supplies, Bo found himself alone with Lillian for the first time since Whitman's revelation. The weight of unfinished conversation hung between them, complicated now by the immediate threat. "To their lives. About earlier," he began, but she cut him off. "Not now, Bo. We have more pressing concerns." She was right, but the emotional turmoil of the afternoon had left him feeling unmoored. Everything he'd thought he understood about their relationship had been upended, and now they were preparing for a battle that could end with both of them dead. "Lillian, if something happens to me—" "Nothing's going to happen to you," she said with fierce determination, "or to any of us. We're going to survive this, and then we're going to have that conversation about why you think I couldn't possibly love you for yourself." Her certainty was both comforting and intimidating. This wasn't the gentle, deferential woman who'd arrived on the train weeks ago. This was someone who'd found her strength and wasn't afraid to use it. The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation. Bo retrieved his father's rifle from its place of honor above the fireplace, a weapon that had defended this land for over 30 years. The weight of it in his hands connected him to the generations of Remingtons who had built and protected this ranch. "That's a beautiful rifle," Lillian observed, running her fingers over the polished wood stock. "The carving is exquisite. My grandfather made it himself, brought it west when he first claimed this land." Bo checked the action automatically. "My father carried it through 2 Indian wars and 3 range disputes, always said it was more than a weapon. It was a symbol of our commitment to this place, and now it's yours to carry, for whatever that's worth." The doubt in his voice was clear. Lillian's hand covered his on the rifle stock. "It's worth everything, Bo. This ranch, this land, the life you've built here, it's worth defending. Not because of money or property values, but because it represents something bigger. Home, family, the future." Her words struck him with unexpected force. She was right. This wasn't just about property or even personal safety. It was about preserving a way of life, protecting the community they'd built, defending the possibility of the future they might share. As darkness fell, they finalized their defensive positions. Martha, despite her recent illness, insisted on staying in the house to tend wounds and reload weapons. The ranch hands were positioned in the barn, the bunkhouse, and strategic points around the property. Bo and Lillian would defend the main house, which offered the best vantage points and the strongest construction. "One more thing," Tom said as they completed their preparations. "If this goes badly, if they overrun our positions, there's a root cellar beneath the kitchen. Miss Lillian, you and Martha get down there and stay put until help arrives. I'm not hiding while the rest of you fight," Lillian protested. "You will if I tell you to," Bo said firmly. "These men have already threatened to kill you specifically. I won't have your death on my conscience." The argument that flared in her eyes was cut short by the sound of gunfire from the direction of the north pasture. Then more shots, coming from multiple directions. "They're testing our defenses," Tom said grimly. "Trying to see how we respond, where our weak points are. Or trying to draw us out of position," Bo replied. "We stick to the plan. No one moves from their assigned position unless I give the word." The night stretched ahead of them, filled with sporadic gunfire and the constant tension of waiting for the real attack to begin. Bo found himself stationed at the main house's front windows, with Lillian beside him, both of them peering into the darkness for signs of movement. "Are you afraid?" she asked quietly during a lull in the shooting. "Terrified," he admitted. "Not of dying. I've made my peace with that possibility, but of losing you just when I've found you." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Earlier, when I told you I loved you, you didn't respond. I was in shock. The inheritance, Morrison's threats, everything happening at once. And now?" Bo looked at her in the lamplight, seeing the determined set of her jaw, the steady intelligence in her eyes, the quiet courage that had carried her through loss and rejection, and was now preparing to carry her through battle. "Now I realize I've been a fool," he said. "I've been so afraid of being hurt again that I couldn't see what was right in front of me. You're not Catherine, and you never tried to be. You're something entirely different, stronger in some ways, gentler in others, and I love you for exactly who you are." The smile that spread across her face was radiant, transforming her features with joy. "That wasn't so difficult, was it?" Actually, it was terrifying, but worth it. Their kiss was interrupted by a sharp whistle from Tom's position, the signal that the final attack was beginning. Through the windows, they could see torches moving in the darkness, more than they'd expected. "How many?" Bo called out. "At least 30, Tom replied. "Maybe more. They've got us outnumbered 3-1. Bo felt Lillian's hand slip into her fingers intertwining with his own. Whatever happened in the next few hours, they would face it together. The woman beside him had chosen to stand and fight for their home, their future, their love, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready," she replied, raising her rifle. The battle for their future was about to begin. The attack came with the fury of a summer storm. Morrison's men charged from 3 directions simultaneously, their war cries echoing across the ranch as muzzle flashes lit up the darkness like deadly fireflies. Bo and Lillian crouched at the front windows, their rifles speaking in steady rhythm as they picked their targets carefully. "Left side," Lillian called out, swinging her rifle toward a group of men trying to flank the barn. Her shot took down the lead rider, causing the others to scatter for cover behind the water trough. Bo felt a surge of fierce pride watching her work. There was no panic in her movements, no hesitation. She aimed, fired, and immediately sought the next target with the methodical precision she brought to everything else. A bullet shattered the window frame inches from his head, showering them both with splinters. "Stay low," he commanded, though Lillian was already moving to a better position. From the barn came the steady crack of Tom's rifle, punctuated by Jimmy's more rapid fire. The ranch hands were holding their positions well, but Bo could see they were slowly being pushed back by superior numbers. "The bunkhouse is taking heavy fire," Lillian observed, pointing toward the building where 2 of their men were stationed. "They're trying to burn it out." She was right. Several of Morrison's men had torches, and they were working their way closer to the wooden structure. If they succeeded in setting it ablaze, they'd eliminate 2 defenders and gain a clear approach to the main house. "Cover me," Bo said, starting toward the door. "Where are you going?" "To help them." He checked his ammunition quickly. "They need support or we'll lose that position entirely." "Then I'm coming with you." "Absolutely not. It's too dangerous." Lillian's eyes flashed with determination. "Bo Remington, we are partners now. That means we face danger together." Before he could argue further, she was moving toward the back door, her rifle ready. With no time to debate, Bo followed, cursing under his breath at her stubborn courage. They slipped out into the chaos of the yard, keeping low and using the shadows for cover. The sound of gunfire was deafening, punctuated by shouts and the screams of wounded men. Smoke from torches and gunpowder hung heavy in the air, making visibility difficult. They were halfway to the bunkhouse when Lillian suddenly grabbed his arm. "Martha!" she said urgently, pointing toward the main house. Through the kitchen window, they could see the elderly woman moving around with what appeared to be medical supplies. She was tending to someone, one of the ranch hands who must have been wounded and made it back to the house. "She's using her Bible to elevate his leg," Lillian observed with professional approval. "Smart woman. That's a bad wound, but she's keeping him stable." The sight of Martha calmly treating injured men while bullets flew around the ranch filled Bo with admiration. The woman who had raised him was showing the same quiet courage under fire that had carried her through decades of frontier life. A shout from the direction of the barn drew their attention back to the immediate battle. One of Morrison's men had gotten too close and was trying to set fire to the hayloft. Tom's rifle barked, and the would-be arsonist fell, but not before his torch landed in the straw. "Fire!" someone yelled, and Bo could see orange flames beginning to lick at the barn's interior. The loss of the barn would be devastating, not just tactically but practically. All their winter feed was stored there, along with equipment and supplies they couldn't afford to lose. More importantly, Tom and another hand were trapped inside as the fire spread. "We have to help them," Lillian said, already moving. This time, Bo didn't argue. They sprinted across the open ground toward the barn, drawing fire from multiple directions. A bullet tugged at Bo's sleeve, and another kicked up dirt near Lillian's feet, but they reached the building intact. Inside, the smoke was thick and choking. Tom was helping wounded ranch hand Pete Morrison toward the door, while flames climbed the wooden support beams with frightening speed. "How bad?" Bo asked, taking Pete's other arm. "Bullet in the shoulder, but he'll live," Tom replied through gritted teeth. "We need to get out of here before the whole roof comes down." They formed a human chain, supporting the wounded man between them as they made their way through the smoke-filled barn. Behind them, the fire roared higher, consuming years of stored hay and threatening to spread to the roof timbers. They were almost to the door when a section of burning hay fell directly in their path, blocking their escape route. The heat was intense, and Pete was coughing violently from the smoke. "Back window," Lillian said, pointing toward a small opening at the rear of the barn. "We can get out that way." It meant exposing themselves to enemy fire, but staying inside meant certain death from smoke and flames. They changed direction, half carrying Pete toward the window as the fire closed in around them. Tom reached the window first, kicking out the glass and peering cautiously outside. "3 men positioned behind the corral," he reported. "They're waiting for us to come out." "Then we give them something else to think about," Lillian said grimly. She raised her rifle and fired through the window, not at the men, but at a lantern hanging near the corral. The glass exploded, spilling oil that immediately caught fire. The sudden blaze scattered Morrison's men, giving them the opening they needed. Tom went first, then helped pull Pete through the window. Bo boosted Lillian up next, admiring the grace with which she managed the awkward exit while keeping her rifle ready. As Bo climbed through himself, he could hear the barn's roof timbers beginning to groan ominously. They'd escaped just in time. But as they looked back at the building that had sheltered their horses and stored their supplies, now consumed by flames that lit up the entire ranch yard, the full cost of this battle was becoming clear. They'd survived the first major assault, but Morrison's men were regrouping for another attack. And now, with the barn lost and 1 man wounded, their defensive position was significantly weakened. "Fall back to the house," Bo ordered. "We'll make our stand there," as they helped Pete. Toward the main house, where Martha waited with her medical supplies and her Bible, Bo caught Lillian's eye. She was dirty and smoke-stained, her dress torn and her hair disheveled, but there was a fierce light in her eyes that spoke of determination rather than defeat. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. Dawn was breaking over the Montana mountains when Morrison himself appeared in the ranch yard. No longer hiding behind his men, but striding forward with the confidence of a man who believed victory was assured. The barn still smoldered behind him, and 3 of Bo's ranch hands lay wounded in the main house, but the night's battle had taken its toll on both sides. From the parlor window, Bo could see at least 6 bodies scattered around the property. Morrison's, men who had paid the ultimate price for their greed. But there were still too many left, and they had the ranch surrounded. "Remington," Morrison called out, "I'm done being patient. Send out the woman with a bank draft for $100,000, and this ends now." "The price has gone up," Lillian observed grimly. "He's desperate," Bo replied. "We've hurt him worse than he expected." From her position by the kitchen window, Martha called out softly, "There's movement by the root cellar. Looks like they're trying to get underneath the house." Bo cursed under his breath. If Morrison's men gained access to the cellar, they could set fire to the house from below or attack from an unexpected direction. "Tom, take Jimmy and check the cellar entrance," he ordered. "Don't let them get below us." As the 2 men moved to defend the house's foundation, Bo found himself alone with Lillian at the front windows. The morning light revealed the full extent of the damage to his ranch. The burned barn, bullet holes in every building, dead horses, and men scattered across what had once been peaceful pasture land. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I'm sorry you got caught up in this. Sorry your inheritance made you a target." "Don't." Lillian's voice was firm. "Don't apologize for something that isn't your fault, and don't forget that I chose this fight." She reached into her dress pocket and withdrew something that made Bo's breath catch. A simple gold band, not ornate or expensive, but clearly meant for a woman's finger. "Where did you get that?" he asked. "I bought it in town yesterday before Mr. Whitman arrived with his news," she said simply. "I was going to wait for you to ask properly, but given the circumstances," she held the ring up to the light. "Bo, Remington, will you marry me?" The proposal, coming in the middle of a gunfight, with their lives hanging in the balance, was so perfectly Lillian that Bo couldn't help but smile despite their desperate situation. "That's not how it's supposed to work," he said. "Nothing about us has worked the way it was supposed to," she replied. "I'm wealthy when I thought I was poor. You're in love when you thought you were broken beyond repair. And we're fighting for our lives when we should be planning a wedding. Why start following convention now?" Before Bo could answer, gunfire erupted from the direction of the root cellar. Tom's voice carried clearly across the yard. "Got them, but there are more coming from the creek bed." Morrison, apparently tired of waiting for surrender, raised his own rifle and put a bullet through the parlor window, sending glass cascading across the floor. "That's his answer," Lillian said, raising her own weapon. What followed was the most intense firefight of the night. Morrison's remaining men charged the house from multiple directions, using the morning shadows for cover. Bo and Lillian worked, in perfect synchronization, covering each other's, reloading, calling out targets, moving between windows as the situation demanded. "Behind the water trough!" Lillian shouted, and Bo swung his rifle toward two men trying to use the metal container as a shield. "Roof!" Bo called out as he spotted a figure trying to climb onto the house. Lillian's shot brought the man tumbling down. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then, suddenly, the sound of approaching hoofbeats thundered across the ranch, not from Morrison's direction, but from the main road. "Cavalry!" Tom's voice was jubilant. Sheriff Morrison and at least 20 men. The tide of battle turned in an instant. Morrison's surviving men, caught between the house's defenders and the arriving lawmen, found themselves surrounded. Some threw down their weapons immediately. Others tried to fight their way out and were quickly overwhelmed. Morrison himself made a desperate attempt to reach the house, apparently hoping to use Lillian as a hostage. He made it as far as the front porch before Bo's rifle spoke with final authority. The outlaw leader fell on the very steps he'd hoped to climb, his reign of terror ending where it had begun. In the sudden quiet that followed, Bo and Lillian found themselves facing each other across the bullet-riddled parlor, both of them alive, both of them whole. "Yes," Bo said quietly. "Yes? Yes, I'll marry you, Lillian Grace Mercer. Though I think I should be the one doing the asking." She smiled, that radiant expression that had captivated him from the beginning. "Then ask." Bo took the simple gold band from her fingers, noting how her hands trembled slightly, the first sign of vulnerability she'd shown throughout the entire ordeal. "Lillian, will you marry me? Not because you need protection or security, not because I need healing or companionship, but because we love each other and want to build a life together." "I will," she said simply. He slipped the ring onto her finger, just as Sheriff Morrison and his deputies burst through the front door, their arrival marking the end of the siege and the beginning of their future together. Outside, the ranch hands were emerging from their defensive positions, and Martha was already organizing care for the wounded. The crisis was over. But the real work, rebuilding, healing, and planning a wedding, was just beginning. 6 months later, Lillian knelt in the rich earth where the final battle had been fought, her hands dark with soil as she planted the last of the spring vegetables. The garden plot she'd chosen was deliberate, the exact spot where Morrison had fallen, where violence and greed had met their end. Now, green shoots of life emerged from ground that had once been stained with blood. "The tomatoes are coming along nicely," Martha observed, approaching with a basket of seedlings. Her recovery had been complete, and the excitement of a spring wedding had given her new energy. "Though I still say you're planting them too close together. They'll support each other as they grow," Lillian replied, brushing dirt from her wedding ring. The same simple gold band Bo had placed on her finger during their proposal in the gunfight. Sometimes plants thrive better when they're not isolated. The symbolism wasn't lost on either woman. The entire ranch had thrived in the months since the siege, not just recovering from the damage, but growing stronger. The new barn was larger than the old one, built with money from Lillian's inheritance, but designed according to Beau's practical specifications. The bunkhouse had been expanded to accommodate additional hands, and the main house bore subtle improvements that reflected both their personalities. "He's watching you again," Martha said with an amused smile, nodding toward the corral where Beau was working with a young horse. Lillian glanced up to find her husband's eyes on her, his expression soft with the contentment that had replaced the haunted look he'd worn for so long. Even from a distance, she could see how the harsh lines around his eyes had eased, how his shoulders no longer carried the rigid tension of a man holding himself apart from the world. "The calf is walking perfectly," Martha continued, pointing toward the paddock where the animal Lillian had nursed back to health was grazing beside Bessie. "No sign of a limp at all. She was stronger than anyone gave her credit for," Lillian said. "Sometimes healing just requires patience and the right kind of care." The calf had become something of a symbol around the ranch, proof that what seemed broken beyond repair could indeed be made whole again. The ranch hands pointed her out to visitors, telling the story of how the new Mrs. Remington had saved her with gentle hands and French whispers. As Lillian worked, she could hear the sounds of the thriving ranch around her. Cattle lowing in the distance, horses nickering in the corral, the steady rhythm of hammers as the hands repaired winter damage to the fencing. It was a symphony of purposeful activity, of life being lived fully rather than merely endured. "Mrs. Remington," Tom Brennan approached with his hat in his hands, still somewhat formal despite the months that had passed. "Beau wanted me to let you know that Sheriff Morrison just rode in. Says he's got some final paperwork about the Clearwater Company trial." The trial had been swift and decisive. The surviving members of Morrison's gang had been sentenced to lengthy prison terms, and their stolen goods had been returned to the rightful owners. More importantly, the threat to honest ranchers throughout the territory had been eliminated. "Thank you, Tom. I'll be in shortly." As the foreman walked away, Lillian took a moment to survey her garden. The neat rows of vegetables spoke to her teacher's love of order and planning. But the wildflowers she'd planted at the borders reflected a new freedom to embrace beauty for its own sake. This was her space, but it was also part of something larger, a ranch, a community, a life she'd helped build. She found Beau and Sheriff Morrison in the study, the same room where she'd discovered Catherine's letters months ago. Those letters now rested in a place of honor on the bookshelf, no longer hidden but openly acknowledged as part of the family's history. "All finished," Morrison announced, gathering his papers. "The territorial governor wanted me to express his personal gratitude for your role in stopping the Clearwater Company. Word is, there's talk of a commendation." "We were protecting our home," Beau said simply. "Any man would have done the same, maybe. But not every man would have had the sense to marry a woman who could fight beside him." Morrison's eyes twinkled as he looked at Lillian. "Ma'am, I've seen a lot of tough characters in my time, but watching you reload under fire was something to behold." After the sheriff left, Beau and Lillian stood together in the quiet study, surrounded by the books and papers that represented their joint management of the ranch. Lillian's mathematical skills had proven invaluable in organizing their finances, while her inheritance had allowed them to make improvements that would benefit the operation for decades to come. "Penny for your thoughts?" Beau asked, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. "I was thinking about that first day when you turned me away at the train station," she said, leaning back against his chest. "How different everything might have been if Martha hadn't needed care. If you hadn't been forced to let me stay. I prefer to think we would have found our way to each other eventually," Beau said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Some things are meant to be." Through the study window, they could see Martha directing the preparations for the evening meal, the ranch hands returning from their day's work, the cattle moving peacefully across pastures green with spring grass. It was a scene of domestic tranquility that would have seemed impossible 6 months ago. "I have news," Lillian said, turning in his arms with a smile that lit up her entire face. "Good news, I hope. The best." She took his hands and placed them on her still flat stomach. "Dr. Peterson says it's too early to be certain, but he thinks there's a very good chance we're going to have a baby." The shock on Beau's face was complete. "But you said, the doctors told you that I was barren." "Yes, but Dr. Peterson thinks the original diagnosis might have been wrong, or that my body has healed in ways no one expected." Her voice grew, soft with wonder. "He says it happens sometimes, that hope and happiness can work their own kind of medicine." Beau's hands tightened on her waist as the implications sank in. After years of believing that his dream of a family was dead, that the nursery upstairs would remain forever empty, the possibility of new life seemed almost too miraculous to accept. "Are you happy?" Lillian asked, searching his face for any sign of fear or reluctance. "Terrified," he admitted, "but yes, happier than I ever thought possible." They held each other in the gathering dusk, surrounded by the life they'd built together from the ashes of their separate losses. Outside their window, Lillian's garden caught the last rays of sunlight, the newly planted seeds already sending up green shoots toward the sky. The woman who had arrived on a dusty train with nothing but determination and a teaching slate had found her place in the world. The man who had thought his heart was buried with his first family had learned that love, like the best gardens, can grow in the most unexpected places. Together, they had planted something that would flourish for generations to come.